remember when the Patterson Gimlin film came out and how that fascinated me. And I thought for sure that people were finally going to accept Sasquatch as a real animal. But the reality was, it wasn't accepted. Too many people thought that that video was a hoax. And after a few years, it was kind of forgotten and went nowhere. Well, that didn't perturb me, as I remember seeing the video, feeling that it was definitely original, and it caused even a greater interest in me to go out and spend most of my life hiking in the woods. Now, I've been doing this basically all my life, not specifically looking for Sasquatch, but because I love the outdoors. As I got into my 20s and 30s, I would be out hiking or jogging. All the places I lived, there were jogging trails with some forest nearby, and rather than run on the streets, which never interested me a lot, I would go and run in the hills along, but I never saw any Sasquatches. And I never saw anything to indicate that there were any Sasquatches. Well, several years ago, I was looking at some online videos and watched some about fellows talking about how they were finding Sasquatch structures and what they did in order to find these things. Basically, they were finding unusual things with tree lanes, with big poles and that. Now, I'd been hiking and running all my life, but I'd never really gotten off the trails. So I decided, hey, I'm going to try that. And I've always been a photography nut. So I took my camera, I got some good audio equipment, and I started hiking. Well, it wasn't long, and I was amazed at the stuff I began to find. At first, not a lot, but later, I found an amazing amount of stuff. And the more I looked, the more I learned where to look, and the more effective I was at finding these things. And now I've literally found hundreds of structures, dozens upon dozens of structures that, though could have been made by people, I'm certain would never have been made by people. And many structures that simply I do not feel that a human being could make. And they're sitting out here in the woods nearby where I live. And that fascinates me, because if Sasquatch isn't building them and humans can't build them, then who is building these things? Because they're not just falling out of the sky. They're being built. So what I did is I put some videos up online, and some people have posed me questions over time. Actually, lots and lots of questions. And what I decided to do is put this little video together to answer some of those questions and talk about my feelings about those things. So, here we go. And hopefully it'll be fascinating and not a bore fest. What other evidence do you have? Well, in my opinion, the best evidence after the Patterson Gimlin film are some of the incredible structures. And what I've done is, of the dozens of structures that I have found, I've selected the most spectacular and most difficult to claim was built by a human. Now, this structure here has been known by people in the area that have seen it. They've dubbed it the Patterson Castle. And this is an enormous structure. It's approximately 45 feet long, approximately 25 to 30 feet at the widest point. And it's about 8 feet tall on the inside, in the center. So it's got an 8-foot clearance. There's probably close to 10 tons of lumber, and not lumber, but poles and trees and wood that has gone into making this structure. The other thing that's amazing about it is there is not one bit of rope, there's no twine, there's not a hammer, nothing has been nailed, and probably 90 to 95% of all of the logs in this structure have not been cut with a saw or hewn with an axe. They've simply been broken. Well, the next thing you say, well, somebody then brought in some major equipment and built this. No, that's not the case here. This is located only about 150 feet from the canyon road. but it's on the opposite side of the creek from the road. And there's about a 20-foot drop down to the creek from the road. And then there's a 20 to 30-foot rise on the other side in order to get to the shelf that this cabin is located on, or this castle is located on. It's located on a shelf by that. It's at the base of a very steep hill. So you've only got a shelf that's maybe 50 to 150 feet wide the entire length as it runs along the river. And this is where the castle is. Now, you couldn't possibly get any kind of big machinery, truck, tractor, anything, across the river. You couldn't bring it from downhill. And once it's on this side, you couldn't get it on this other side of the river. So basically, this could not be built with any large machinery, which means that all of these poles would have to be broken off, or basically found in the woods by a human, if humans were going to do it, drug or carried to this place. Remember, they weren't sawed, which is not what humans do. And then this structure was put together, and the structure in and of itself is amazing. The structure with no nails, no rope, no nothing holding it together, basically uses the weight and the natural bend in all these logs and trees to hold itself up. And the most amazing thing about it is there is about 8 to 8.5 feet tall in the center. It's a center pole. And it rests on the ground. It's not dug into the ground. It rests on the ground. And then it stands straight up, and the rest of the structure, all of the structure, rests on the top of this pole. And the pole isn't even squared on both ends. It's like it was gnawed. It wasn't even chopped with an axe. But this center structure, of which these tons and tons of weight of all these poles are resting on, is what supports this structure. No person would ever do that. No person would take the risk of using such a precarious centerpiece, because this whole structure could fall down and kill who's ever inside. There's that much weight in the poles and that are on top of this. This is amazing. Anybody with any kind of objective mind looking at this would say, first of all, I don't know that a person would ever build this. And second of all, I don't know that they could build it. And that's the thing that's amazing about it. You know, part of what I do is deal in antiques in the Old West. And in the Old West, when they build a cabin, people just didn't go and haul wood from miles away. They would take whatever local trees and that were right there, cut them down, hew them with an axe, cut them with a saw, and incorporate them into the cabin that they were building. This is the equivalent in size. It's actually larger than the average cabin that you see from the 1800s in the woods. In fact, considerably larger, probably the size of about 3 of those cabins. So it's bigger than that. It contains as much wood as 3 of those cabins, and there's not a nail or a rope or anything holding it together, and no one used a saw or an axe. I'm sorry. People didn't build this. So without a doubt, in my opinion, that's the most significant evidence of why this structure could not have been built by humans. And if it wasn't built by Sasquatch, then just who built this thing? Now, one other point about this structure. I've had stealth cameras on this structure for 1.5 years. I mean, why would you spend this kind of time, probably months, in building this thing and then completely abandon it? Now, no Sasquatches came in either. Now, sadly, and I've got video of this in the next video, in the fires of 2018, this structure was burned up along with several other really neat structures.